Welcome everyone to our Spring 2022 series of OTF Connects webinars entitled Supporting Teacher Efficacy and Student Engagement. My name is Peter Beans and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's session with Raman, Sarai, and Jill Toombs entitled Pathways to Student Success in Social Studies, History, and Geography, Exploring Engaging Possibilities. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are gathered in the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to actions stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Please allow me to welcome Ramandeep, Sarai, and Jill Toombs. Raman is an educator in the Toronto District School Board. As an educator for over 15 years, she focuses on an anti-oppressive education within the global competencies and inquiry to engage students. As a member of OESTA, she has written for their Sikh Heritage Initiative, Geography Resources, and the lead writer for Resources for Remote Learning. She also co-authored the Hands-on Social Studies Grade 6 resource. Moreover, Raman was part of the team who helped revise the social studies curriculum based on the TRC and was the project lead for the Ontario Library Association Sikh Heritage Project. Jill is an elementary educator with the TDSB. She teaches from an anti-oppressive lens and is passionate about fostering critical thinking and collaboration in young primary learners. Jill has been teaching for 16 years, during which time she has hosted teachers as a demonstration classroom, participated in the TDSB and Ministry of Education Collaborative Inquiry Project, written and developed lessons for OESTA, and presented her work most recently at the Ontario Library Association's Super Conference 2020. Let's turn it over to Raman and Jill. Welcome.
Thanks, Peter, for that wonderful introduction. I'm just going to share my screen and get the slideshow set up, and we are going to share our resource links with you at the end of the presentation as well. And so you'll be able to get a copy of the slide deck and some other resources that we're planning on sharing that we're showing you to do today. So our plan for today is we're going to introduce you to OESTA's latest resources. We're going to be talking about centering equity. We're going to be looking at a strategy where we're focusing on primary sources and how to use them through one of the lessons that I'm going to be showing you. And we're going to try out that activity, and then we'll show you a few other links to some other resources as well. Before I begin with that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about OESTA. So OESTA is the Ontario Elementary Social Studies Teacher Association. It's composed of teachers and educators throughout Ontario, and our goal is to support educators who teach social studies for grades 1 to 6 and geography and history for grades 7 and 8. I also put a link to the OESTA website here, and you can follow us on Twitter. We put those links as well in the resource that we're going to send you. We are going to talk about the latest project we did in those resources, but if you're looking for other things that OESTA has, under their lesson sections, you can find other projects and lessons that OESTA members have done before. You can also find some other projects listed here, find things by division groups if you're looking at them, videos, French, if you're looking for specific strategies as well. There's lots of resources if you're teaching combined grades. So there's lots of amazing resources to look at beyond what we're going to be showing you today. And there's also more information about how to be a member as well, if that's something that you're interested in. Also, OESTA is also part of the Social Studies Educator Network of Canada, SENC, and it's pretty new. And over the past few years, social studies educators across Canada formed this national network to share and develop resources. They also have a newsletter that they run, and they're advocating for social studies on a national level. And OESTA is one of the directors of the network as well. And there's directors from every province, and 2 of 3 of the territories are also involved with this as well. But from here, we're going to be talking to you and sharing a whole bunch of amazing resources. So the newest or the latest project that OESTA did was a project developed to support educators with asynchronous and synchronous learning or hybrid learning. There was a team of 5 educators across Ontario who helped to create lessons that you could use in the classroom or a hybrid approach or completely remotely if you wanted to as well. I was the project lead on that and also one of the writers, and Jill was one of the writers as well. So with that project, we were focusing on the historical thinking concepts and the inquiry process. And some of the lessons that we will focus on will show you that parts of the inquiry process were focused on the lesson. Some of it involved a lot more, so they varied in lessons. And so with the lessons we're going to show you, some of them target specific inquiry skills. Some of them were a little bit more broad, so you can see how you can adapt and use those in your classrooms. So there was 6 lessons that were written, and we will send you this exact slide deck as well, but this slideshow links all of the actual lessons if you need access to them as well. I'm going to walk you through 3 of them, and then Jill's going to walk you through the other 3 as well. So the first one I'm going to walk you through is a lesson that focuses on grade 8 history, but you could adapt some of it into grade 6 as well, because there are some overlaps. The big idea, there's a few different questions you can tease out. What are the qualities of a Canadian or qualities of someone or group who contributes to Canadian identity? And who has contributed to the identity of Canada? What does it mean to be Canadian? And the inquiry skills involved were interpret and analyze information, and the historical thinking was significance and perspective. Most of the lessons are split into 2 parts. The first part being something to try to do in the classroom, but you also could do it remotely. So in this lesson, I wrote this one, and the way I was to start off introducing, we were going to look into who built the railroad. And so we first just looked at this primary source document here and the famous last fight photograph, and just asked students based on what they saw, who built the railroad? What does it look like just from this photograph? From there, students looked at 2 other photos, this one included as well, of the Chinese Canadian workers who worked on the railroad. And based on that photo, who do they believe worked on the railroad? What are some questions they have? What are some observations and inferences? And I'm going to go into more detail about this process a little bit later on, because we are going to use the primary sources in this lesson for an activity. And then from there, the second part after building that information with the students is that they would get a choice board. And with this lesson, one of the things, a precursor to this is that you wanted to have already taught what primary sources are, so that students know that before going into it. And then with the choice board, there's various activities for students to choose from. So they could choose to make their own primary source and about something within their own family, or pick and choose something that tells of an important story from their family or a friend, or just their family life story. So finding some sort of primary source at home. Also, the first activity was creating a word art of different types of primary sources. There was one where they watched a video on the making of Vancouver in Chinatown, and then they got to do a reflection on the next slide of their findings from that video. So there's a lot of rich, authentic, different activities to do. We also chose things that were not just photographs. So students could also read an article about the head tax and explaining how that one document told the story of that particular family, and then they record their thinking on their next slide. So there's a variety of primary sources and ways that they're being used, and not just photographs, but also then having students looking for and finding their own primary sources in their family. And sorry, I'm just going to go back. There we go. And you can also find that lesson on the OESTA website. We linked it into the slide deck, but when you're looking for it, you go to this page here, and each page has their own lesson link, but you'd click download to get the full PDF. And then all the links that I'm showing you and more can be found in the lessons that you're actually going to get. The next lesson is a grade 5-6 split lesson. And the big idea was, how do governments and other international organizations work together to keep people safe and healthy during the pandemic? So the governmental part is connecting with the grade 5 curriculum, and international organizations connect with the grade 6. And the lesson deliberately avoids focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic, but the fact that it could be difficult or traumatic for some students. So within this lesson, they looked more historically at other pandemics for making those links and connections. And the historical thinking that went with it was cause and consequence and interrelationships. And the inquiry skills were interpret and analyze information. And so the first part of the lesson was understanding exactly what a pandemic is. There's a video to go with it that explains what a pandemic is. It's like a cartoon animated video, but then there's a Google form exit card to go with it for students to explain their understanding of what a pandemic is. And then students start to also look at, there's a choice board where they also start to understand how does the government support and keep everyone safe, and then looking at how does the World Health Organization, and that being the international organization, help to support and help people, so that you could see both aspects of it. The other thing is that with this lesson, if you're just teaching grade 5 or just teaching grade 6, you can tease out the pieces that you only need for that single grade group, or you can use it as a combined piece as well. And there's also further activities where there's an alphabet for the pandemic, and there's a link of that book for students to look at, but also students could create their own alphabet book connecting to vocabulary around pandemics or governments and international organizations that they could do as well. The third lesson I'm going to talk about is a grade 5 lesson that connects with the government unit as well. The big idea or guiding question is, how effective are government actions in addressing a problem or an issue? The inquiry skills were interpret and analyze, evaluate, and draw conclusions. And the historical thinking was cause and consequence, interrelationships, and perspective. So in this lesson, they really walk through a big chunk of the inquiry process. And what's wonderful about this is that the question that the students are going to look at, so what they're looking at is in terms of, should elephants at the Toronto Zoo be moved or the exhibit ended? So instead of you as an educator have to gather all the information so the students have everything they need, in this lesson that's already given to you. So this document's created, and it's all the background information you need and for students to understand the issue before actually interpreting and analyzing. So everything is done for you, the background information, what the problem is, the opinions of the various stakeholders as well. So everything is there. You do not have to create it and make it, which is wonderful. And then from there, there's further graphic organizers created through the lesson for students to interpret and analyze the problem. And then to judge the government's actions. And they're all done on Google Doc links. And then for this one here, they also have samples in terms of what possible responses are to give you an idea as well. And then you can just copy and edit for your students. So everything is there done for you. And then once in this lesson, you've walked through how to go through this problem and analyzing it with your students, there's further graphic organizers made where students can pick from other topics that are given. So issues about Toronto needs more bicycle lanes, protecting the Great Lakes, Ottawa-Piscot needs a new school, reducing poverty in Canada. So those are 4 other topics that could be addressed. And again, the same thing, that background information is all given to you. So you have everything you need. You don't have to be putting it all together. So that's another wonderful lesson from OESTA. And I'm going to pass it over to Jill.
Thanks, Ram. Okay, so just let me get all my Zoom settings. This is like when I'm teaching my class on Zoom. I always turn my own camera off. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the next 3 lessons involved in the project that Raman's been describing for us. And this lesson that you're looking at here, you're seeing highlights from a lesson that was designed for grade 2, which is where I teach. I teach down in Primary Land. So just like the other lessons, you're going to be finding this one on OESTA's website. We're going to link this directly for you. And then when you download it, you're going to have access to all the links that I'm going to show you now. So you don't need to worry about losing a link. We're going to definitely give you everything you need at the end. So the idea behind this lesson is really tied to the grade 2 topic of families and family traditions and celebrations. And so I just wanted to start with this resource, which I know many people are probably familiar with, but in case you're not, I wanted to show you that TVO Kids has this fantastic show called It's My Party. And it highlights family traditions and celebrations cross-culturally from many different cultures. It's Canadian content as well. And it highlights these in ways that are super fun and engaging. Basically, 2 kids plan an entire party. One is the party planner who knows exactly what's happening because they celebrate this tradition with their family. And then they invite a second child along to join them in the celebration who may or may not have ever seen or heard of this kind of celebration or festival or tradition before. It's really well done. It's fantastic, not just for grade 2, especially for grade 2, I will say, for this particular topic in the curriculum, but it's great if you're just looking to build representation and tell some diverse stories in your class as well. So definitely check that out if you're not aware of it. It is linked in the lesson. It's one of the recommended resources in this lesson. So the idea here would be that we would want students to practice their communication skills. That's the main inquiry focus of this lesson. And after it's made to be done after you've already done some work on what are traditions exactly, and what you want your students to be able to describe a tradition that's important to their family. And you want them to share that tradition with the class in some way. So the other kind of cool thing you're getting with this lesson is this choice board. It can be presented, in person. It also works virtually. And it has a variety of ways that students might choose to share their tradition with the class. So posters, maybe using tech. My classes in the past have really loved the artifact choice. I've had students bring in like a piñata and talk about the significance of piñatas at their family parties. And one year I had a student build a diorama out of clay that showed her family camping trip. They go on a canoeing portage every summer, and it was a really important tradition for her. So you're going to get a wide variety of responses. The other nice thing about this choice board is that it includes audio files, because we know that young kids in your class may not have the ability to read or access all that print. So every slide in this choice board will read the text to the students when you click on the little speaker icon. So that's super great. Okay, so let's move on to lesson number 2. So wait, if you have grade 2 students or friends who teach grade 2, definitely send them this lesson because it's handy. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk to you about is also found on the OESTA website. It's a little different than the other lessons though, because this is less topic oriented. It doesn't really require a specific grade or topic. It's more of an approach. And I'll show you what you're looking for on the website. You're going to be looking for something called the Cosburn Cross-Curricular Inquiry Approach. When you download it, you're going to get all the links that I'm about to kind of bring you through now. So apparently there were some teachers at Cosburn Middle School who worked together to kind of develop this approach. That's how it's got its name. And the idea underlying this model is basically that we want to be working with our students to value different types of questions and giving them an opportunity to develop skills to really generate rich questions so that it can naturally lead into inquiry and some deeper learning. One of the things I really like about this lesson is that it starts with a provocation, and included in the lesson, which I immediately saved to my files because it's so handy, is a Google Doc which explains a little bit more about what provocations are. If you're new to them, if you teach kindergarten, you definitely know what a provocation is. But if this is new, or this approach is new to you, or you don't do a lot of inquiry, or you're just looking to change it up, this is really handy. It explains what it is. It gives you some resources about how to create authentic provocations that your students are going to really love. And then it even has a curated selection of powerful images that may lead to some really great questions in your class that you can use. And then the second part of the lesson really is all about dividing your class into groups and having the students lead the inquiry. So what you want to do is you want to divide your class into 4 main groups, and every group is going to have a role in the inquiry process. The first group is going to be fact finders, and so they're going to be asking about facts and asking about the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and how. How did it all happen? The second group are going to be reason finders, and this group is going to focus on the why. So a topic or a question that you guys are exploring with your class, the reason finders are going to try to explain why that happened, or what are the possible, reasons. It could be something personal, political, a national reason, but they're going to be looking for those reasons. The third group is going to be the value finders. So this group is going to consider the multiple perspectives, or it could be multiple stakeholders, depending on how you're using this and with which grade. And the really important part about this group is that you're going to ask them not just to represent or explore those multiple positions, but you're going to ask them to ultimately make a decision or a judgment call based on their work. And then the last group are going to be your alternative finders. So this group is going to look for alternatives. So alternative solutions, it could be alternative perspectives. It could be voices that we don't hear that we might need to hear to understand this even better. So there's a lot of ways that you can really tweak this and make this really fun for your class and interactive. The writer of the lesson suggested that this could be used anywhere from grades 2 to 12. So it's just a matter of deciding how you could use it in your own class with your students. But I think it's really great and interactive. So I think it's if you're hesitant to start inquiry, or you're maybe just needing something new, check this out, because it's a lot of fun, and I think the kids will really benefit from it. Okay, I have one more lesson, and then we're going to get into some other topics. So this third lesson that I'm going to talk about now was written for grade 4 students, and it relates to the physical and political regions of Canada unit, but it focuses really exclusively on the physical regions aspect. When you go to the OESTA website, you will look for Canada's physical regions and human interrelationships. That's the title of this lesson. And then when you download it, you're going to have access to all of the resources that I'm going to walk you through right now. So this lesson, I have to say, out of all of them, is just really jam-packed with pre-made resources that you can make a copy of and have. And so it's really useful. If you teach grade 4, or you know someone who teaches grade 4, this could easily act as a map for your whole unit. I'll take you to the first one. The first slide deck is a selection of, it's just mostly like background knowledge building for your students. So you may want to do something fun with them to see what they already know before you show them this. But the slides show us maps of each physical region, and then they highlight the key features that are associated with that region. And so that would be really helpful for grade 4 teachers to have. Make a copy for yourself and change it as you need. And then the second part, which I really like in the lesson, is another slide deck that's already created for you. It's a selection of pictures that have been curated, and all the source materials are going to be included there. And all of the materials are going to be, sorry, my family just walked in and they're trying to be so quiet. Hi, please be so quiet. Yeah, it's okay. They're not going to interrupt. So all of these pictures relate to the physical regions, or a physical region. And so I would use this in my class by getting partners or groups together. and asking them where they think this picture represents, or does it represent more than one physical region, and to justify the reasons why. And again, it's just nice to have these resources that are already done and saves you so much time. But I think the best, oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a question?
I have a question. When you were discussing for grade 4, and when
Yes.
you went to Canada's physical regions and you asked us to go to the website, Oyster website, and you clicked on the last, because I saw it was clearly written Canada physical, but we have to search in the lesson.
Well, do you know what, Suresh? We're actually going to send you links to each lesson that we've talked about today. I'm going to send you the direct link to it after.
Okay.
We actually tried to link it directly in the chat. Like we were going to send you the links as they came up, as people wanted them.
Okay.
But the way that OESTA has their website set up is that you actually have to download a copy before the links within the lesson become active for you. So, so we're going to give you, like at the end of this, you're going to get a slide with everything you need. So you'll be able to, don't bother looking for it and worrying about not finding it. I promise we're going to give you like everything.
Because I was thinking, like, when the new lessons come, maybe we will not able to see, or no, it will always be there.
It will be there. And then, you know, I'll just show you with the last slide deck that was up. And I think this is true for most of the OESTA lessons. You're going to open up a copy that's view only.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to edit it or say print these images for your students, you can just go and make yourself a copy. Yeah. And then once you've made a copy of that, that's yours, and you can change it or tweak it as you need to for your class.
Sure. Thank you, Jill.
You're welcome. And I think the last thing I'm going to show you is actually, it's so great. If you teach grade 4, you'll be so happy. Because this is actually a Google site that was created, and it acts sort of like a choice site, a choice board in a way. And it would be fantastic to support a culminating task, or even as the main components of your research, of your students' research. It provides, and the author of the lesson asked their students to choose 2 activities. You could change this if you needed to. But what it provides is 9 different choices, and each choice has the land region. It has information for the students to read or listen to, and then it has an activity for them to do based on that information. And it's all here for you. So it's super awesome. I'm going to show you my favorite one. It's choice number 2, the Western Cordelia. So let's say a student wanted to research and find out more about this region. They could click on the link, and it's going to open a story map, and it's very visual. I love what this author, like the person who wrote this lesson, really spent time picking great resources. So the students will go through this information, maybe, you know, make jot notes, or however you're going to ask them to do that. And then after they go through that story, they're going to choose one attraction that was mentioned in the story, and they're going to make a slide, a presentation, a brochure, a commercial, or a radio ad about it. And then to help even more, there's some guided questions. And so that's just one choice, but there's actually 9, and they're all awesome on this choice site for you. So I think it's super useful for grade 4 teachers. I actually messaged a couple of my grade 4 friends, and I was like, you should come. There's something really good for grade 4 today. I think it's a good one. Oh, I see where I am now. Pardon me. Okay, so I think that is the end of the lesson highlighting portion of our webinar today. But what Raman and I want to do next is kind of talk about 2 sort of useful strategies that we've been using in our classes for the last year or 2 that have really been helpful to us. So I'm going to start talking about the first one, which is really about centering equity. And so I just wanted us to, you know, I know that when we read the social studies, history, and geography curriculums, they're quite dense, and it's overwhelming sometimes to think about all the content we have to teach and deliver to the students. And it's especially overwhelming if you have a combined grade like I do. I always have a combined grade. I have one this year as well. But what I kind of want to talk about today is just a different approach to planning. So if you plan in ways that really focus on thinking skills, you know, big ideas, opportunities for student inquiry, you can still cover the content, but maybe shift the focus so that what you're working towards is maybe a more culturally, historically responsive methods, like ways that will reach our students. Because I know I teach in Toronto, and even out of Toronto, it doesn't matter where you teach these days, we're teaching, in ways that we want to engage our diverse student populations. And we really want to be thinking about amplifying voices and stories that are sometimes missing from dominant historical and social narratives. So it's just a shifting in how you might plan for social studies. Okay, so how do we ensure that we're centering equity? This year, I spent some time reading this book, Cultivating Genius by Gholdy Muhammad, and she developed a really helpful framework it's an equity framework. And it was originally designed for literacy, but I think it's really great and applicable to many different areas in the curriculum, not just for literacy. So if you aren't familiar with her book, I don't have time to go into real detail about her book, but it could be hours on its own. But definitely check it out. It's like my #1 teacher resource of the year for sure. For me personally, it's been really useful and helpful. And so if you're not familiar with it, do check that out. But I'm going to give you like the super reduced Cliff Notes today, and it's a 4-part framework. So in her book, Gholdy Muhammad really argues that sometimes we focus too much and exclusively on teaching skills, right? Teaching that content of the curriculum. And if we really want to reach students in ways that are culturally and historically responsive, we've got to go beyond those skills, and we have to think about including not just skills, but also identity, intellect, and criticality in our lesson planning. And so I kind of took her 4-part model, and I came up with this sort of questions that you could ask yourself when you're planning for social studies and inquiry. You could ask these questions, and it should help you sort of get to that point where you're actually teaching the skills in ways that are really exciting for your students. So for identity, you could ask yourself, how will this lesson or unit or activity help my students learn something about themselves or others? The skills, because we're talking about this framework in social studies, history, and geography, you want to be thinking about which historical thinking concepts or inquiry skills will the lesson help your students to develop. For intellect, this is the one that really relates to those 21st century learning skills. How is your lesson or unit going to challenge students or foster critical thinking, get those rich discussions, or create opportunities for new learning? And then criticality is that piece where you're really thinking about engaging your students in thinking about power, privilege, social justice, or you're thinking about amplifying stories or voices that maybe are left out of many dominant conversations. Okay, so what does this look like? I teach grade 2 and 3, so I kind of put myself through this year learning how I can apply this framework, and I want to show you a unit I did with my class. So we were looking at an environmental inquiry, but I really wanted to make sure that I was also tying in those social studies curriculum skills in the inquiry. So this is kind of how we did it. Starting with thinking about skills, I really wanted my students to, sorry, there's one picture not coming up. I'm gonna just play with my Zoom here for a second so it will cooperate with me. When thinking about skills, I really wanted my students to analyze some primary source documents so that they can kind of understand visually and see and determine the ways that urbanization and industrialization had impacted the land in our local community, which is Toronto for us. So I got the first 2 pictures from archives. The first one's from the Library Archives of Canada, and the second one's from Toronto Archives. And we took a look at the pictures, and I just asked them to look closely at them and to notice what changes did they notice, and also what questions did they have. And it was really interesting what they mentioned. They said things like, oh, there's so much more grass in the first picture, and there's so much more smoke in the second picture. And some of the questions that they noticed were things like, oh, somebody asked, why did they build the factory so close to the water? Isn't that going to pollute the air and the water at the same time? And why didn't they save more nature spaces? I remember somebody asked, why didn't they save more nature? Why is there no more room for nature? So, even young kids are making some really great inferences and asking great questions. Okay, so from there, we kind of made predictions about the changes and the consequences of those changes in the land over the last 200 years. And as it says on the slide, but I don't think I said it, it links to grade 3 social studies. That was the skill link there. But from this, we really wanted to look more at what are we doing as a local community to kind of help. So for the intellect part of the lesson, we took a look at ways in which some different communities in our local community in Toronto and in Ontario are actually contributing to the environmental unit. And in particular, we focused on Indigenous communities, and we learned about
Is it just me or have we lost audio?
We lost audio. I think she'll come back in a minute.
Yeah, I noticed her video was stuttering too. So
Yeah.
hopes of keeping him accountable.
Here.
Oh, did I?
Now you're back, Jill.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. You missed all the best parts, everyone. Oh, gosh.
I bet your kids have started to use Netflix. Like she's saying.
Okay. I don't know how much I'm going to repeat myself, but I'll just quickly say that, so we started.
60 seconds.
Okay. So we looked at the ways in which Indigenous communities and youth are actually contributing to the environmental movement in Canada. So we learned about Autumn Pelche, and we watched a video about her moment when she confronted Justin Trudeau, and the kids were like, she's so cool. Like she was their hero, watching her stand up and really fight for her community. And we read a couple articles from Teaching Kids News, which is a newspaper published in kid-friendly language, about different ways that youth are actually participating in the environmental movement. And my students' minds were blown to find out that there was actually a group suing the Ontario government over their climate change plan. So a lot of great, rich discussions came from these activities as well. Moving into the criticality part of the lesson, I had planned to look at the way that climate change was impacting different communities at home, and then also global communities. So we found this website, climatekids.ca, and it's interactive, and your kids can choose a region of Canada, and then in kid-friendly language, it specifies really in detail how climate change is impacting that area. So that was amazing to watch the kids work together and make those connections to like the big thunderstorm they remember from last summer, for example. And then we also did a picture walk and really looked closely at some images from news articles about climate change in different communities around the world. And the kids really came up with some pretty profound connections when they realized that, in particular, when industries like farming and fishing are impacted by climate change, it really affects not just small communities, but everybody that's connected to that food source that's being produced. And so, again, even though I teach really young students, these kinds of activities can really produce some rich learning opportunities. And then finally, for the identity portion of the framework, of Goldie's framework, we focused on the actions that we could take as individuals to make a positive impact on the environment. And these are 3 student projects. One is a more arty project where somebody was just making promises to the earth. A lot of my students did posters. We did a poster campaign, some digital, some hard copy, hanging our posters up around the school for the school community to give them some awareness of these issues. And then this was actually on the side here, and doing this planning as a teacher and a mom, sometimes you have extra help from your own children. And actually my daughter, and talking about with her and everything, when I was doing some planning for this, she came up with this with my niece, which was their zine, which was photocopied. And I actually shared this in my class too, with my students as well. So, I mean, it can really go in a lot of different ways. Okay, so what I want to tell you before I hand it over to Raman is this slide that I showed you first is a slide I think might be helpful to you if you're interested in taking this equity framework from Goldie Muhammad's book and giving it a try, planning some social studies inquiry through this framework. So these guiding questions we're going to include in the package that we're sending to you at the end of the webinar. Okay, and I'm going to stop now and have a big drink of water and pass it back over to Raman.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through another strategy that we have, and that's using it from one of the particular lessons in which the one going back to using primary source materials. I'm just going to present this. So that's all ready to go. There we go. So in this lesson, one of the things that's important I had mentioned before with using this strategy in particular, because you could use it in any grade level. It just with the photographs I'm using focusing on grade 8. But the concept of primary sources should be taught beforehand, or students should have been exposed to it. And the learning goals are photographs are primary sources. Photographs gives us lots of clues about the past. We use photographs to learn about history. We learn how to analyze primary sources and make inferences using evidence from primary sources. Now, one of the things that I strongly worked on beforehand with my class with this is also working on questioning part of inquiry and coming up with various questions and moving from quick thinking questions to deeper thinking questions. And I know many people have seen a question matrix before, but I did not make this, but I found this, I'll go back, this Google slide deck cue chart, which is editable, and you could have your students work on it and assign them, and it looks wonderful. We've also shared it in the links of the resources that you're going to get at the end of the presentation. But this looks amazing in terms of being able to use with your students and having them type right into it. So a great hybrid approach as well if you need to do something virtual or if you're doing it in the classroom as well. It works both ways. So that's another resource we will share with you. But just working on questioning with students, because not only are students making observations and inferencing with the photographs, but also coming up with further questions. And I found a lot of times students end up with more questions after looking at photographs than less. So what I did with my students is created a Jamboard with the photograph. And then I have the caption in terms of the information that was given with the photograph. So in this case, Donald A. Smith at the ceremony marking the last spike to be driven into Canadian Pacific Railway on the 7th November 1885. This photograph was taken from Library and Archives Canada. And then in this section up on the top left-hand corner, this is where I have my question or provocation for the students. Based on this photo, what can you say about the people who built the railway? Use evidence from the photograph to back up your ideas. Look at gender, race, age, clothing, and so on. And then these are my students' actual responses. I also teach in Toronto, I teach a special education class of 6 students, and they all have different abilities and understanding, but with this task, they are all able to participate. And some of them may just be coming up with observations. Some may be able to go further and make some more inferences. Some of them may be more basic or surface level. Some are being able to go a little bit deeper. So it really varies. But at least with this activity, I was very happy that all students are participating and seeing something because they can all access and look at a photograph. From there, I showed them then this photo as well and asked the same question. And this was my starting point in terms of being able to teach about the building of the railroad within Canada. So students didn't necessarily have much background information unless it was something they were taught beforehand. And just these are some of their observations that they noticed. And then this was the last photograph that they looked at. And we did model with the first picture what to do. And then they went further into doing the rest of the Jamboards and making further inferences. Some just made observations. So looking at what their clothing was, what they were wearing. And this photo was taken in 1883 and took it from the Royal BC Museum archives. So that was the starting point in terms of the lesson. After the fact, then within this actual OESTA lesson, there is a slide deck that has more information in terms of Chinese Canadians' contributions within Canada. With my students, we also learned about the Chinese head tax, the Exclusion Act. We looked at the Chinese Workers Memorial in Toronto. We also looked at the history of Chinese contributions, the development of Chinatown specifically in Toronto, because the school is located close to that as well. And so that was also good for them to see and make that connection. Looking at current Canadian Chinese contributions, we did exit cards throughout to check for understanding and connecting to identity. I know that was one of the frameworks in Goldie Mohammed's literacy framework or equity framework. And so with this lesson, it really does lend a lot to inquiry, but also connecting to identity and Canadian identity and what does that look like, and what does that mean. And then other ways that I've used the same activity in slightly varied ways is, this year I have a grade 6 and grade 8 mixed class. Last year I did this activity and used this graphic organizer, and I had a grades 2 to 5 in my class, and we were looking at a settlers unit, and we were looking at, again, photographs as well, and having the students write their observations. What did they see based on one of the photographs? And then what does this tell you about what their life was like then? And the other thing that I did is that we did this one all on paper. I also had printed out the photographs for them. So if students need something tactile, they need to be able to touch it and look at it more closely. This may be another way to try to do that as well, if you're going to be doing it in the classroom and depending on the age and range of your class as well. And then with my current group of students, I also wanted them to see that primary sources can move past photographs as well. So in this case, this was taken from the Thinking Consortium, and they had quotes from Chinese Canadian youth during the early 1900s. And I took those quotes and put them each on a slide deck for the students, and they could choose which one they wanted to pick from. And then based on that quote, what inferences can you make about what life was like for Chinese Canadian youth during this time? And I also did the same thing as Jill had mentioned before, where there's a voice recording. So some of my students are not able to read the words, but they can still access the information and share their ideas as well. So that was another great piece, but also having the students to understand that that once we, like, photographs are one, but even words are another primary source, and looking at different versions of primary sources as well throughout the unit that we were studying, and looking at identity and Canadian contributions. The further learning and consolidation, though, with this task is that you can actually build questioning with the primary sources, and students may have more questions as a result of the photographs, and that will allow your students to conduct their own inquiry in anything that they might be wondering about. It also could be a jumping point to go into the history of that specific topic or subject for you, and that's how I initially used it, but allowed the students to go into further questioning. One of the things we did was also that practice of how to analyze primary sources. So I created an exit ticket after we had done those jam boards with those photographs, and had the students then look at this picture taken from Library and Archives Canada about camps for the Chinese workers at the CPR. Write down 1 to 2 inferences about the camps using evidence from the photograph. And then what's one important thing you learned about Canadian contributions and identity, and how are primary sources an important material for understanding relevant and authentic stories in history? So there's lots of different and rich ways to be able to use primary sources. And we wanted to embed hybrid versions. So you had tech versions and you had low tech versions. So you can use and adapt to whatever you need in your class. So those are just some images of the exit ticket. So we actually want you to try part of this activity that we talked about. So we're going to go back to the Jamboard and the photograph, because we want you to walk through it so you can see potentially how could you use this with your own students, and also just get you either thinking as an educator or thinking from the lens of your students. But what we want you to think about before we show you the Jamboard is to think about settlers. And what are the stereotypical ideas of who settlers were in Canada? So we want you to think about the country of origin, race, class, gender. We just want you to think about it for the next 30 seconds. And then I will share the Jamboard. So just hold on, do some thinking. It's that wait time we talk about. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the Jamboard, and this is what we'd like you to do. And we'll put the link for the Jamboard in the chat in just a second. So what we would like you to do is we've given you a photograph, and it's taken from the Delta Archives in British Columbia. And how does this photograph interrupt dominant ideas of settlers in Canada? Use evidence from the photograph to back up your ideas. So that's one of the frames in the Jamboard we would like you to put your responses and thoughts in. And then the next one is, based on this photo, what questions do you have about settlers in Canada? What are you wondering about? So we'd like to give you about, say, 5-7 minutes or so, maybe less, to be able to start to fill in the Jamboard. And Peter's put the Jamboard link in the chat. So we'll give you 5 minutes or so, and please feel free to, we want you to be as open. If you can't access the Jamboard because maybe the device you're on and you just want to share your ideas in the chat, then please go ahead and just share it in the chat. Or if you want to just unmute and share that way, you can as well. So I'll go back to the slideshow just because I'm like, maybe some people might be nervous about posting things and being the first one. So how about we leave it as a surprise, and we'll put it up there so that more people might contribute to the Jamboard.
That first one, should dominate actually be dominant?
Oh, sorry. Let's quickly change that. We'll fix that. I see a few responses in the first one. So if you are able to, and you want to jump into the second frame as well, you can start putting any questions that you're wondering about as well.
Do you know where that photo was taken? Is that Saskatchewan?
Just unmuting. It said it's in Delta, British Columbia.
Oh, BC. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in BC. So I do want to respect everyone's time. So I'm going to maybe give another 30 seconds, and then we'll quickly review some of the Jamboard comments. And feel free, even after the webinar is over, if you want to record more ideas and share, by all means, please keep adding to the Jamboard, and you will get that link as well so that you could look back at it as well. All right, so let's take a look at the Jamboard, filled with things. So how does this photograph interrupt the dominant ideas of settlers in Canada? So I'll just read some of the things they said. If anyone wants to elaborate or share anything, then please let me know. I just trouble reading that one, so I'm gonna try to make that one bigger and go over the photo. I did not know Sikhs worked there. They aren't white, European, Indian. You don't always hear about stories about Sikh settlers, Asian, different groups of settlers other than white, Indigenous. So I'm not sure what the person meant by that, like, because Indigenous were the original people here in Canada, not settlers. So I'm not sure exactly. It's harder when it's just one word and not being able to describe everything that you were meaning or saying. So let's check what some questions are. Wondering what were they doing? Hard labor? What happened to their families? What other ethnic workers had this experience? From where? Were they treated fairly? How are they coping with harsh climate? These are amazing questions and comments. And I think, it's like, just imagine even what our students can see and do. Because I find, especially with the questioning, and when students look at photographs, they just come up with all these different ideas and thoughts that maybe didn't even pop into my head, or they notice things in a photograph so subtle that creates this whole new idea and question. It might take you in a whole different route. And the other great thing about this is that you could then lead students to do their own inquiry. You could pick something from here as a whole group to do together. There's lots of different ways to work with it. You might just focus on questioning, and that might be your, that part. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the end slides. We're going to go back to Peter, but I did want to share, these are some of our links to the website, Twitter, email. I put Jill and I's Twitter accounts as well. You will get a slide deck with all the resources as well. We'll put a link in the chat as well for that as well. And I'm going to pass it back to Peter.
Okay, let me share again. Back to PowerPoint. It's been years since I used PowerPoint. I'm a Google Slides person. Okay. All right, that's up, yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and thanks, Roman and Jill, for doing this. It is so nice to see so much sharing happening. The tools out there to support education, like Google Docs, obviously, and it's nice to see Google Sites being used. It's such an easy to use tool and so professional, honestly. And Jamboard makes interactivity so nice. So it's really nice to see all these tools being used. Anyway, did I drop the link in for you for the feedback form? No, I didn't, did I? Let me just do it right now. Okay, there it is. That's not the short link, but go ahead and just click on that. So tomorrow you're going to receive an email, and it'll have the link in it again. So if you don't get a chance to fill in the feedback form tonight, the link will be there. You'll have a link to the slide deck, as well as the other resources document that they've created for you, and a link to where the video is posted. And the video is posted actually on the YouTube channel which is the link on the right-hand side. So let me pop both of these links in for you, and then I'll talk about them. That's going to work. Yep, there we go. So the YouTube channel is where all these videos are posted. So you might want to go and have a look over there as well. I did hear something about one of the assignment options was to create like an audio recording. So Carl Fusco did a presentation on creating podcasts. So if you have a look at that, the students, of course, in this case, wouldn't be creating a podcast, but the basic process is the same. And then I've also got a link there to the OTF PD calendar. I'm finding a lot of teachers don't know about the PD calendar, but basically it's like the go-to place for finding out about AQs and ABQs that are being offered. So instead of going to all the different faculties of education or the different union sites to find out what courses they're offering, you can just come here. You can, pull down the discipline that you're interested in and the type of course that you want, whether it's in person, although there's no in-persons right now, or online, and you'll be able to find them there. So it's a nice central repository. And then lastly, our next presentation is coming up on Thursday. It's a part 2 presentation. If you took part in the strategies for student ownership of learning, this was really impressive. Two math teachers, and they totally transformed the student success program starting with their math department. And then I think it expanded beyond that. So even if you didn't take part in part 1, it's probably worth checking out. And I think you all know how to find this already. Even if you don't have the link, you could just Google OTF Connects and you'll find it. So anyway, thanks so much, everyone. I think I'm done. I'll stop sharing. Give anyone a chance to ask any last questions or unmute or anything you like.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yes, thanks, everyone.